I apologize. My board had a little button that wasn't pressed, so I got it fixed. It's great to see everybody tonight. You all look wonderful, I'm sure of it, on this wonderful Sunday evening. Thank you so much for being here. So grateful. We've got a lot to cover tonight, and I want to thank everybody, all of our members, our Patreon members, our subs, etc. And if this is your first time here, we just ask you, if you get a moment, if you could hit that subscribe button and hit that thumbs up. That really, really helps out the channel here. So appreciative of that as a whole. A big thanks to all of our mods, and a special thought and prayer for Miss Sophia. If you've not heard, she's not doing well or not feeling well in her home country, and she's been hospitalized for a little bit. So we want to make sure that if you can, please say some prayers for her. She, along with Mimi J2, Maui Girl, and Teresa M., we are just always so grateful for what these ladies do for us, and we want to send our prayers to her at this time. So we ask that the TIR family join in saying prayers for her speedy recovery. We love all of our mods, and they've helped our channel grow so much along with you as members and subscribers. And this has been a welcoming place for so many, and we enjoy being here with you every single week, and we cannot do it without them. So let's please keep her in our thoughts and our prayers this evening. If you could, can you put if Miss Sophia is watching in her comfortable hospital bed, can you put a heart in the chat for her so that she can see that and hopefully get some extra spirit out of that? So it would be just wonderful. Well, a lot going on over the last couple of weeks. I also want to share with you something that I did not share last Sunday, but the Wednesday before last week, when Dr. Gary and I did the show last Sunday, I didn't think it was appropriate at that time until a little more time had settled in. But we had, Karen and I had just returned from Las Vegas, being at UNLV. I will let you know, I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of details, but our oldest son is the chair of the economics department at UNLV. And he was in the building during the active shooter last week, or a week and a half ago, whatever it was, on that Wednesday the 6th. And of course, you can imagine our phone lit up with our daughter and our other children, and we just kind of took off and got there. But what is amazing is he got 8 other people in his office in that building. He was on the 5th floor. And long story short, the suspect tried to get into his office. I had called him while this thing was going on, and I had him on the phone. And he had 8 other people in his office. The suspect tried to breach the door. He was unsuccessful, but he ended up shooting some of his colleagues. And so my son missed it by literally probably less than a minute. He heard the gunfire and immediately ran to a safe place, locking other people in his office with him. So we are very proud of him. He saved many, many staff members. And that's probably why I was a little on the edge last Sunday. And I apologize for that. But at the same time, I think you guys have known me for quite some time, that it takes a lot to get me to rattle. But that was one of those things. And now that things have settled down, there is still one of his colleagues who is in the hospital that he's not been identified yet. I'm not going to say anything, but please pray for that individual as well. And, God bless UNLV, the police department, Metro, as well as UNLV Detective Damian Garcia. Damian Garcia was the detective that confronted the suspect as he came out of the building. And now here's another piece of the puzzle that the universe is on schedule. Damian and my children, our children, used to play hockey, street hockey together when I lived in Carlsbad, California, in Southern California years ago. And Damian was a police officer at Carlsbad Police Department. So that man is a hero. That man saved a lot of lives, including my son's. So with that, I think we should also get a special prayer for Officer Garcia, that he's able to make it through this as well. Because the second phase of all of these things, like everything, is there's always something more that comes behind that. So anyway, God bless Damian if you're listening. Thank you, brother. He and I communicated over the email, and what a small world. The fact that my son would be one of the chairmen at that university in the economics department, and Damian would be the police officer that would respond to help save all of those people. So don't forget these officers, these men and women who are out there giving up their potential lives for us. So let's always be grateful for that as well. Also, our thoughts and prayers go out to the families of, Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan tonight. The things we're going to talk about this evening, I got to be honest with you, it bothers me that some of these decisions are being made. I've listened to, some of the logic being presented, but I've also have enough experience under my belt to realize that, we're on dangerous ground here. I mean, let's be honest. We have 4 University of Idaho college students who've lost their lives well over a year ago. And tonight we're going to talk about the crime scene. And we're going to talk about the news reporting that the home where these 4 students were brutally murdered, AKA the crime scene, will be demolished on December 28th in just about 10 days. So the university is doing this during the break, the holiday break, while students are away and off campus. So the big question tonight on the thumbnail is why? Why? Why would they do this before suspect Bryan Kohberger's trial? One of the things that we need to always remember is everyone has a presumption of innocence until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in the court of law. And it is up to the state to prove that reasonable doubt. However, the jurors that will be sitting in that courtroom will be jurors for Bryan Kohberger. They are his jury. They belong to him and the state. They are picked together. And one of the very first things that happens right off the bat when a jury panel is seated and, once they're impaneled, the judge opens up, with opening statements, allows the prosecution and the defense to open up with opening statements. And they talk about their sides and their positions. And one of the first things that they're going to say is the defense is going to get up and tell the jury, you have to operate right from this day forward on a presumption of innocence. You do not have any evidence in front of you that shows that my client, this is, his attorney speaking hypothetically, that my client has committed these crimes. And so that in of itself is where the jury has to operate from. And with that in mind, we have to then ask ourselves, what is going on behind the scenes here? Because Kohberger's jurors should have the right to see all the evidence at the crime scene, all of it. And that house, in my opinion, is evidence. And so what I want to do tonight is I want to just briefly go over, I'm going to share my screen here. I have a little PowerPoint, as always, about the crime scene as a whole. And I want to take you back to that day. And I'm not going to talk about the types of evidence that they have against Bryan Kohberger. I'm not, tonight, we're not going to go down this lane. Okay? But what I do want to talk about is this house as a whole. So the goal of this, tearing this house down, would be to lessen the impact and the emotional impact of the totality of this event. I'm assuming that's probably where the university is leaning. I could be wrong, but I'm assuming that's where they're coming from. And my understanding, just watching the news just recently, yesterday, where, we see, family members coming up on the news and talking about, Kaylee's dad talking about, even behind the scenes, the investigators are split on whether or not this is a good idea. I can tell you that in all of the murders that I've ever worked, and I've worked a lot, we never, ever, ever tore down a crime scene. Now, I worked one of the most horrific homicides in Southern California back in 1998 of the murder of Matthew Checky, the 9-year-old little boy who was using the urinal, and a suspect came up behind him and slaughtered him in that bathroom. That bathroom became a symbol of that particular incident, and it was horrific. Nobody wanted to see it. There were council meetings about it. There were people that were saying, hey, we got to get this thing. We got to get rid of this thing. It wasn't till after the murder and the trial and everything kind of settled down when rational heads prevailed. And it was at that point then the city decided to remodel and, restructure that bathroom. But to this day, it's still there. It looks different, but it's still there. And in this particular situation, where we have 4 types of evidence in a homicide or any kind of crime, and the 4 types are real evidence, demonstrative evidence, documentary evidence, and testimonial evidence. And we're going to go over each one of these pieces of evidence tonight in terms of why our system of Lady Justice with the blindfold and the 2 scales, why our justice system works functionally very well. All of these pieces of evidence do not operate on emotion. They are void of emotion in a courtroom. Now, the emotion that the investigators, the prosecutor, the defense investigators, the families, most importantly, the emotions that they experience are beyond comprehension, the family first. But they are entitled to all of the evidence, not a memorial. Yet. And I say yet, okay? Because the court system is designed to establish what type of evidence comes into a trial, into a homicide trial, especially something this high profile. So I've put up some bullet points here. In order to be admissible, evidence must, one, be authentic, be in good condition, be able to withstand scrutiny of its collection and presidential procedures, be presented in the courtroom in specific ways. And that's from both the prosecution and the defense. And what's interesting here is you have this dynamic, this adversarial dynamic of the Kohberger's family and all of the murder victims' families. They're both going to be into that room, i.e. the courtroom, and they're both going to be feeling emotional responses to what is going on here. Okay? And so all of those requirements are intended to ensure that the fact finder makes his decisions on the basis of reliable information. Now, that fact finder is a jury. They are responsible for determining whether or not that evidence is viable, and they believe it or they don't. Now, that's an interesting position, because right now, if I was the defense attorney for Bryan Kohberger, I would be lined up in the front of the classroom to sign off and stipulate that the house should be torn down. 100%. Make it go away. Make it go away. And the reason for that is, let's say there's now a memorial. If the university believes that creating this memorial will be a safe place and a haven for all of these other students, well, then just go ask the families, or better yet, if you've never ever been to the 9/11 memorial in New York City, then you'll see that memorial has all of the victims' names around the infinity pool. And what that does is it causes you to reflect on the event in deep cognitive thought. My fear is, at some point, if the trial's not over and this memorial is sitting there, this is going to, and I'm no psychologist by any way, shape, or form. You know, I have Doc Brucato and Ann and many others on who are. But the bottom line here, I think, for anybody to understand is, what's the rush? Take your time. What is the rush to get this thing torn down? Because in the second column over here, you see admissible evidence is what it purports to be. It is genuine and not fabricated, contrived, forged, or materially altered. Admissible evidence is offered by an attorney as foundation on an indicator of authenticity. A witness or a rule is used to confirm that the evidence is what it's asserted to be. Evidence is admitted for trial once the circumstances of collection and preservations are identified, i.e., who seized it, when was it seized, where has it been since that time, how was it preserved, and what records exist to confirm the preservation. Now, this is a lot of information I know tonight. And I'm not an attorney. I'm just a homicide detective. And still working, by the way, those of you that know me. I'm still working with the indigenous tribes. And so I'm working actual homicide cases. If my DA came to me and said, hey, Chris, we're going to tear down, if this was my case, that house, I would vehemently say, no, you're not going to do that until a jury has decided guilt or innocence against that individual who's charged. Okay? Because the reason for that is, out of the four types, let's think about it. Real evidence, number one, often called physical evidence, consistent of materials, items that include objects and things that a trier of fact, i.e., a jury or a judge, can physically hold and inspect. Isn't that interesting? Evidence of real, examples of real evidence are fingerprints, footprints. Do we have footprints in this case? The answer is yes. That's real evidence. Are they collected? The answer is yes. That also comes in as real evidence. Could there be a juror who says, I saw the presentation on footprints, the one in front of the door. I'd like to see it in the house, or at least where it was, so I get a frame of reference. Right now, the state's going to say, well, we've got a 3D real-time mock-up of what it looked like. Okay. But basically what they're saying is, sit in your chair, we're going to take you to the moon, and you're going to pretend you're walking on the moon with Neil Armstrong. Okay. I'm here to tell you, in Alex Murdaugh's case, I think we can all agree that when that jury went to that crime scene, they had a real understanding of the mechanics of that particular incident. Okay. So other types of real evidence, DNA, murder weapon or sheath, clothing, narcotics, videotapes, crime scene photos, body camera photos from the police, security footage. I think we're going to see a lot of this, kind of unfold during the trial. I'm sure of it. And I'm sure the district attorney or the county attorney, whoever it is very, very, very confident that they're going to be able to present to to a jury all of this digital recreation stuff. What they have is what we would call demonstrative evidence. And that refers to an item that is not from the crime scene itself, but that can illustrate or demonstrate a concept. This is what they have. And this is what they're going to present. An example of demonstrative evidence is an anatomically correct model used to show where the victim was injured. Charts, graphs, drawings, computer graphics, models, audio and video presentations, or any other device used to demonstrate, characterize, or explain a verbal testimony. So what will happen is you're going to have the operator of what they call a FARO, F-A-R-O, and probably somebody from the FBI's lab. And the judge is going to say, call your next witness. This person's going to come up. We saw some of this, obviously, in Lori Vallow's case in Idaho as well, where the expert got up and he started testimony about the phones and the pings and et cetera, et cetera. Well, in this particular situation, you're going to have a variety of experts. You're going to have blood spatter experts. You're going to have shoe pattern analysis experts. You're going to have knife pattern analysis experts. You're going to have crime scene recreation or restructure experts. All of these experts are going to go through a process of voir dire. And all of this information, they're going to be asked over and over again by, opposing sides. If the defense has experts, they'll be asked by the prosecutor. If the prosecution has experts, they'll be voir dired by the defense. And then, of course, the judge gets to ask questions as well. And what it is, that will be, everybody knows, I'm preaching to the choir here, everybody knows that at that point, the judge will rule whether or not they can be an expert and testify as an expert on the field of, what they're going to testify. In this case, it's going to be modeling, i.e., 3D models, or, maybe they've made up a model and they're having it made, back in Quantico, and that will be brought into the door. Okay. We don't know yet. I don't know yet personally either. But what's troubling about this is they have the house right now. They own the house. It's there. The university has that house. And why they're wanting to bulldoze this thing down this early in the game when there hasn't even been a trial date set. And I heard, Kaylee's dad mentioned that on News Nation the other day, where he says, look, I don't get it, but I'm the family member, i.e. this poor guy and his family and the other family members, for Ethan, right, for Xana, for Kaylee, and for Madison, they're suffering. I know what it feels like to lose a child. My wife and I experienced that 20 years ago. Our son was 20. I know that depth of pain that's indescribable. You cannot describe it. I almost lost another child a week and a half ago, as I mentioned at the beginning of this program. My heart sunk to an unbelievable place. It took me back to September 3rd, 2003, when Ryan passed away. It was instantaneous. These family members deserve an advocate within the district attorney's office to say, look, we hear you. They don't need pressure from the DA, i.e., hey, we've got everything lined up. Okay, you never know. You never know. I mean, look what's happening in Alex Murdaugh right now. They've got a court clerk who's being hammered. Who would have thought of that during the trial? Whether or not she's done anything is we don't know, right? But these are the kind of chances you take in the court system. And this is why I think the university should just take a deep breath, slow down, and let the legal system work first. That's justice for these victims, for Kaylee, for Madison, Xana, and Ethan. That is justice. And justice has not been served yet. There is not closure here. Okay? There is no closure here. The fact that you're going to bring in this type of evidence, this demonstrative evidence, and say, hey, look at our great models here. Okay, great. Maybe it will work. There's probably a high probability it could work. But wouldn't you rather have 100 than 99? Didn't the Savior went after the one to make it 100? In this case, I think this family is doing what they feel the DA is saying. And, I pray for them every night I can personally, that they get the justice deserved. The next type of evidence that's going to come in is documentary evidence. And that includes evidence found in documents, including direct evidence and circumstantial, letters, contracts, newspapers, any social media, i.e., Papa Rogers or anything like that, that he may have leaked into the environment, and we call that leakage. Okay. This will come in under the rules of evidence, under the documentary evidence. And then, of course, the last one, which is the most unreliable, is testimonial evidence. And the reason for that is when a person takes the stands and answers questions about a case, however, because people's statements can be tainted by poor memories or bias, a number of admissible rules will then kick in and apply. There's going to be some scrutiny about the length of time it took to call 911. Okay. Whatever that testimonial evidence is going to be, it's going to be brutal. I'm going to put a bingo card on that right now. It will be difficult. Now, whether or not anybody's done anything, I don't think so. I don't think personally, I think if Bryan, if he is the suspect, i.e. he's found guilty, okay, I think he probably would have killed them too. But he was running out of time, for lack of a better term. For example, while witnesses may testify as to what they, observe and perceive during an event, in some situations, they may also testify about statements they heard outside of the court, i.e. that weren't made under oath. Such statements often constitute hearsay evidence and are generally not admissible because they're not as reliable as statements made in a court of law under an oath. However, there are many exceptions to the hearsay rules for the admission of statements made outside of court. So when these two surviving witnesses testify on behalf of the state, they're going to be cross-examined by the defense. And that cross-examination, I would submit to you, is going to focus on the pre-incident time, post-incident time, during the incident time. But extra time will be spent on post-incident. And there will be curveballs thrown about, sod, what we say, some other dude, right? So the defense potentially could have a field day here. We don't know what that evidence is going to be. We only know that it's testimonial evidence, but we do know there's real evidence, i.e. a footprint, i.e. a digital footprint as well, a physical footprint in blood and a digital footprint, apparently tied to Bryan Kohberger. So there are also times a witness may seek to provide testimony about a person's character. So often to make that point, that the person is the type of person who would or wouldn't say or do what is at issue in a particular case, like hearsay evidence, this type of evidence also has reliability problems, as it does not directly show whether the person actually did or said something. Because of this, character evidence is generally not admissible, but there are exceptions. I would submit to you tonight, there will be many exceptions on Bryan Kohberger's character evidence. There will be people that have come up from his past. There may be, people that he's dated, girls that he's lured in the past who will make allegations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, et cetera. And by the way, I have a running list here of everybody. Thank you so much, everybody that's here and that's supporting our channel. We love you and thank you. But I want to stay clarity here, because once I drift, I'll drift. You guys know me like a book already. Last 3 years here. Finally, there are times when certain evidence is complicated, like DNA. That it requires an expert. to interpret and explain it to the court as well as to the jury. This type of expert testimony is only admissible once the expertise of the witness is established and their testimony is found to be based on reliable methods and acknowledged within the scientific community, i.e., they are voir dired by the court as an expert in a particular field. So if you're tearing apart DNA and genetic DNA, and you happen to be a genealogist, who's been dabbling in the forensic side of things, for a couple of years, sometimes that's enough, sometimes it isn't. It all depends on who the prosecution potentially would put up, or who, could come back and do a rebuttal in relationship to, that the defense testimony, expert testimony. We saw that in the Murdaugh case with the reconstructionist. Excuse me. Everybody else have that cold going around? Man, I got it bad as well. I'm on day 8, but feeling better. Thank you. So, we saw that. Remember the reconstructionist that, had Alex, almost like a contortionist, firing that rifle. And then, of course, the state put up, the doc, and he was like, "You got to be kidding me." And even to this day, people are still scratching their heads. So always remember that testimonial evidence is the weakest type of evidence. And so there will be many other motions coming as we get closer and closer to the trial, because the goal of the defense will be to suppress any inadmissible evidence. Okay. And that suppression can go on in the form of motions, and we're already seeing it with Lori Vallow in Arizona. They're already starting to say, okay, here we go. And they're already, filing motions. Of course, Chad and, his attorneys are doing the same. But what they're going to try to do is, when one side of a case tries to introduce evidence that isn't relevant, material, or competent, the other side can ask before or during. Now, this is important to understand. Before or during trial, to have the evidence suppressed. Now, if that house is gone, we don't know how the defense will use this ability in court. We don't know what they will say. Again, I go back and submit to my opinion. This is just my opinion. If I was the defense attorney, I would keep a poker face, big smile inside, and run to the front of the line and say, "Your Honor, that house needs to go. We agree. It should be a memorial for the university." That is a smart defense attorney. Because once it's gone, it is gone. It is gone. Now, and think about this. In this sentence, this very first paragraph right here, the other side can ask before or during trial to have the evidence suppressed. Your Honor, we have just discovered exculpatory evidence while looking at the model that we didn't see before. But we can't get to it anymore. It's gone. We'd like to, I'm going to file a motion, Your Honor. I just saw some blood stain that I never saw while I was in the house. This is why the defense went back over the last couple of weeks into that house. It's not to go back and say, okay, what are we missing? That's part of it. But the other things are, what will they miss? What will the prosecution miss that we're seeing? Because one area where a motion to suppress is commonly raised is with the chain of custody issues, where a piece of evidence isn't properly secured from its collection to trial. Are there pieces of evidence that aren't properly collected yet that the defense will raise when the house is gone? I don't know. I don't know. But I can bet you the two investigators working with them are former homicide guys out of Southern California. One of them's out of Riverside. They're not a couple of slackers. They are not a couple of slackers. They have been around this block a couple of weekends. And you can bet they're doing their job. That's what they're supposed to do. They're doing their job. And so, for an example, if one side can show that a blood sample was not properly labeled, or a weapon wasn't properly locked in an evidence room, or a house wasn't properly retained, there's no way to trust the results of any subsequent test or analysis, like blood or fingerprints or anything to that point. While this evidence may be relevant and material, it would not be competent because of intervening custody problems that could have led to inaccurate test results. So that in of itself, a great defense attorney will have a field day with it. I mean, look what Johnny Cochran did in the O.J. Simpson trial with just a glove, right? With just a glove. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. Right? I mean, that in of itself, that was a brilliant move. It was a brilliant move. They had the glove at the crime scene. At the crime scene. Imagine if they would have torn down the house where Nicole Simpson had been murdered. Imagine if they couldn't have taken a jury out there to show them, this is what this looked like. This is where the glove was, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Imagine if they would have taken the car where they found the blood transfer and crushed it and made it go away. Okay. This in of itself is extremely problematic in the long run, I would submit to you, because there are things I felt from the very beginning in this case. When Karen and I went there not last Thanksgiving, but the Thanksgiving before, which everybody remembered, and all the trolls that I planted the glove at the out front. You can't make this stuff up on YouTube. Unbelievable. Like I was going to bring my own glove, for clicks and views and drop it down. Unreal. But that said, I think there is going to be a moment here where the jury's going to ask themselves, okay, I see all the fancy, technology. It's all here. We get it. Okay? But, I want to go stand in the backyard. And I'm going to play for you and remind everybody that there's also behavioral evidence here potentially. And it's huge. You not only have the audio, you not only have some of the video, which I've seen some of these other great channels out there. I just saw one the other night. Mob. Love that guy. Smart guy. He ties in all the different sounds and of things going by, and I thought it was very creative, amazing. Actually, it was very good. But these are the kind of things where a jury's going to go, "Hey, wait a minute. I want to go stand on that porch. I want to stand on Kaylee's porch. I want to see what Kaylee saw. I want to see what Xana saw. I want to feel what Ethan felt in that house. I want to feel what Madison was experiencing. Wait a minute. I want to feel and see what the witness saw. I want the lighting conditions correct. I had a case years ago. It was Rebecca Jensen was the name of the victim, where I had a witness who was saying it was a guy who had committed the murder. My partner and I took her out. Her name was Arlene Whitney. She's in custody, so I can tell you her name. She may be out by now. She got 25 to life, but anyway, she was saying, yeah, I stood right here and I could see him stabbing the victim over there. And my partner and I went out the same night, i.e., a month later, the same conditions, same type of moon. And she stood with me, and he stood over where she said, she sent him over to where she witnessed his crime. And she was adamant that he was killing this victim. After it was all over, we dropped her off and said, thank you very much. Have a great night. And we looked at each other, and he goes, dude, he said, there's no way. I said, well, I agree with you 100%, 100%. So long story short, we ended up, interviewing her many more times, and she ended up confessing to not only lying, but being the murderer. And she ended up getting convicted with her and 2 other people. That's the kind of thing where in a situation like this, if I was a good defense attorney, and I'm not giving them any ideas, by the way, folks, they've already thought of this stuff. Trust me. I'm just an investigator. Trust me, they've gone through and they've created a storyline about how they're going to get through this stuff. And personally, one of the things they're going to say is, well, what was the lighting conditions? And you're going to have one juror who's going to say, yeah, what were the lighting conditions? I'd like to see those lighting conditions. That's why in Homicide 101, they tell you don't touch anything when you go into that house. Don't ever touch anything. Don't touch the heater. Don't go to the bathroom. Don't smoke. Don't do anything into that crime scene, because that is cross-contamination that you are bringing into that crime scene. Okay. Well, you can betcha if there's no house, you're not going to be able to recreate the exact feeling that was going on in a 3D model. In a 3D model, you are not going to be able to say, so when you opened the door and you saw him and you saw his brushy eyebrows, what was the lighting condition behind him? You're not going to be able to do it, even with photographs. Now, what you can do is bring some sense of that by a crime scene visit. And I think in this case, the fact that they're trying to take that house down, and they're going to be taking that house down on the 28th of December, it's a 50-50 chance. You are rolling the dice, I would submit. I've been wrong many times. Perhaps I'm wrong on this one. But I think there's going to be one juror who's going to say, can we go over there and at least look at the lot? Okay? And that will be in the form of a note to the judge at some point. Because remember, if they panel a jury who has no, ill-conceived, premonitions about this particular case or guilt or innocence of Bryan Kohberger, they're going to want that guy that's never heard about it. Okay? Well, that's the guy, quite frankly, that is going to want to hear about it even more if he's in the middle of it. If he gets impaneled on a quadruple murder, that guy, he's in for the game. For quite, maybe months, he's going to give up his life for justice for these victims. Or for Kohberger. That's the way our system is designed. You can bet, potentially, that he'll be the guy that will say, you know what? I'm just a farmer in Idaho, but I'd like to go down and see where this thing went down. I'd like to feel it myself. And it's gone. It's gone. See, they didn't tell the jury that if he doesn't know anything about the case. And that juror is going to go, why is it gone? What happened? Oh, well, we wanted to make sure everybody felt okay when they got back from the semester. Okay, but what about Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan? It's my job, i.e. a juror, to make sure I bring justice to either side. That will be a wake-up call that day. And at that point, it's too late. As I used to say as a kid, no deposit, no return. So I hope somebody from the university is listening tonight, that it's not going to go away. In fact, you may exasperate it. I mean, it may get worse. Because now children can go, when they get home, students can go to that area and actually reflect on what took place there. Right now, because there's a trial still outstanding, that reflection will become intense. It will become intense for some students. When the trial is over and there's a verdict either way, that intensity lowers itself. It lowers itself. And it's at that point they reflect on the victims. It's at that point a family gets healing. It's at that point a family can say, I can do this. I can get through this. I can make sure that I can get to the next place. But until that time, the families are left hanging. They're out there. They're the victims. They represent their children. And the system should work 100% just in case. Just in case. Because think about this. Look at this piece. As you can see, I'm behind the house, and right there is the balcony to the back. This area is very interesting from a geographic standpoint. I mean, this is the back side of the house here. Now, I see Dr. Gary just jumped in the chat. Welcome, Gary. He was going to be on tonight, but he's out with some family, and we certainly love him. But this is the back of the house, guys. The reason I want to point this out, and Dr. Brucato and I and Greg and Dr. Burgess and Dr. Ramsden, we've all talked about this particular part of the house. I will submit to you at some point that This is an area that was utilized as an area for surveillance into that house. It is literally straight across to the balcony of, Madison and Kaylee's rooms. Now, why is that significant? Because it gives us the mindset of the perpetrator. It gives us the totality of planning pre-incident. What type of things this individual went through to get to this place, to where the decision was made to kill. All of this behavior is a buildup to the actual event. All of this is he's into this. As Tina says, he's hunting. He is hunting. And it comes up right up this little embankment here, but then it goes up into a really high hill. We have a very difficult task because there's a chain link fence here as well for an individual to commit such a high profile situation and then flee up this area. I'm not saying it's impossible. So while I stood there, my thought process was, this guy, he probably did not come in on foot. As you heard me say there are too many barriers. Now, could he have parked away or something to that effect? And ultimately, we find out that my hypothesis was correct, that he had utilized a vehicle, if he's the guy. Okay. But when I stood behind the house that day, my intuition kicked in, my investigative intuition that said, you know what, I've seen this rodeo before, and there are just too many barriers here for somebody to take chances like this. And remember, the suspect wants to mitigate his risk. They want to lower the risk of getting caught. And so I was thinking through the lens of an individual potentially, if they would have done this. I'm saying, I don't know if it's probable. Now, the point of entry, this would be very easy to get into this residence from this part of the backyard. Actually, if you look down here as well, it's a little icy, so right down there you'll see a screen laying, and these are some of the back bedrooms. Does Dr. Gary want to hop on? Gary, do you want the link? He does? Okay, hang on. Let me get Dr. Brucato in here. Hang on. Gary, can I send it to your cell phone? And while I'm doing this, guys, we've got almost 2,200 people in here. Can you guys do me a favor and maybe hit that thumbs up button? It really helps the algorithm here. Okay, hang on. I'm going to send this to Gary. All right, I just sent it to you on text, but I may have to email it. Hang on. It'd be great to have his perspective on, obviously, the psychological aspect here. As you guys know, if you didn't see one of the very first shows we did this, Dr. Brucato nailed the personality type. Okay, Gary, I just sent it, the link to your email as well. All right, so we'll get Dr. Gary up here. And now, while we're doing this, Okay, let me, while we're waiting for him, let me thank some people. Laura, that was very kind of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Gwen, welcome. Merry Christmas. Ella Finn, super sticker, thank you. So grateful. Merry Christmas, Lady Butterfly. 23 months you've been with us. Thank you so much for your support. You're so kind. Laura, well, thank you. And yes, we are so lucky that Ian is safe. And Dr. Brucato and I were going to do a show on some of those things coming up here. Short skirts, strong boots, lipsticks, and revolver. Oh my gosh, this is awesome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And thank you for gifting a membership. You're so kind. This will do nicely. Thank you for being a member that long. Holy cow, almost 2 years. Canadian Cookie, 15 months. Absolutely love you. Thank you. Keep those wheels rolling for justice. True cow curl. Thank you. You're very kind. All right, one more here. University wants Fact House gone as soon as possible to protect their income. Dollars for registrants discussing for victims. Yeah, we'll see. How that's going to unfold here. Maybe we can get some leverage here. There he is, the one and only. How was your trip?
Well, everything got messed up because we have some inclement weather, so didn't really work out very well. I want to turn it right back around.
It's great to see you. Hey, so I'm just talking about, I went over, different forms of evidence, et cetera, tonight. And now I'm just talking about some of the perceptive, views of what the suspect may have been utilizing through this back area, looking into the house, essentially. And you talked about when you first nailed this guy, his personality of what we would see. Do you remember what you may have said a while ago? If not, just can you summarize, the type of individual you saw in your mind before they even arrested Kohberger?
Well, first of all, as I'm sure you've already said earlier in the program, we have to bear in mind that Kohberger is a suspect who hasn't been found guilty. But if indeed he is guilty, then I suppose there was an excellent match between the profile that was given and him as an individual. But what I had said at the time was that looking at this case, we had to bear in mind whether it was the original intention or it just worked out that way, that this was a mass murder by any definition, and that it was a mass murder involving a blade. And having studied extensively mass murder, I could tell you that people who employ blades as opposed to firearms or any other means really other than a firearm are far more likely statistically to be authentically emotionally troubled, to be people who are perhaps a little bit peculiar interpersonally, perhaps a little paranoid, a little bit odd in terms of the way their thoughts operate, the way they would interact with other people. And so what I envisioned was a socially awkward, hot-headed, paranoid, kind of mechanistic person that would probably be described by people as someone who always needed to kind of be in control, who could explode on you in a kind of hostile way, who was very methodical and machine-like and rote in his way, and would be regarded by people as an odd duck. And we talked over time, and kind of built up the image of what we were probably dealing with here. And what originally jumped out was that there was no, at least overt, sexual motive to the crime, although, thank you, Chris. So you were like my agent. But there was, at least at first, unless we sort of read into it, that there were undertones of perhaps some sexualized motive toward one or more female victims.
And maybe we can refresh everybody's memory, Gary, on that note. Remember what we were all talking about going back to that March incident, right? Can we refresh everybody about the car break-in?
Oh yes, yes, yes. So let me just finish the thought I was making, which is that it wasn't clear initially if there was an overt sexual motive. However, as the story unfolded, Kohberger was identified. If he is guilty, there are stories about him, particular hostility toward females when he was a TA, and his attempts at dating women he interacted with, etc. And then there are other stories that are told about him, like, for example, on the Dateline episode about him, some evidence was put forward that apparently he had sort of messed with the property in a female's home, and then played the role of a rescuer, of going in to install cameras as if this was to help her, and may have somehow utilized that himself, sensibly, to watch her. So the idea being that there may have been this kind of sexualized component, this kind of stalking, peeping, knowing everything about a woman who doesn't even know you're alive, that kind of thing. And so what started to emerge was a picture of a person who had that kind of control need, and who, was something of a failure at negotiating a relationship in real life, and so would have lived in this kind of fantasy world in which he developed a relationship through this kind of detached, godlike watching from afar. And interestingly, we also talked about that whoever committed the murders in Idaho had a lot of the characteristics that we actually see in serial killers. And I pointed out before, Kohberger was even arrested, that about 11.78% of mass murders, according to my own data, go on to commit another murder and become serial killers, or had previously committed one. And this is extremely interesting because if he is a serial killer, what kind of serial killer would he be? And there is this small group of serial killers that don't have overt sexual motivations, but who are motivated by ego and a kind of misanthropic hatred towards a certain group of people, whether that's women, certain type of race, certain race, certain type of person, that they just want to kind of get even with, that they feel have hurt them. And that type of serial killer, like we saw Ted Kaczynski, we saw that with David Berkowitz, etc. They tend to be the types that send missives and letters and manipulate, on the internet, etc., because of that godlike feeling of, you don't know who I am, right? Interestingly, they all seem to take a fake name, like a sobriquet or a nom de plume or something, and they write, because it's this idea of like coming like a lightning bolt out of the heavens randomly to hurt, etc. And so for that kind of person, the key is that there's a colossal ego, and that is exactly the kind of person whose offenses over time would, if they are sexualized, would be things that had to do with ego, like peeping, inserting a camera somewhere, watching you from afar, because it's that whole idea of like, you don't know that my eye is on you at all times. And I'm increasingly wondering, if there was a relationship in his mind with the female victim for a long time, where he knew all kinds of things about her and watched her, and this is the kind of thing where you would know everything about a person, everything. Like, you could answer questions like, what cereal do they eat in the morning, and what hand do they eat with, and which way do they walk to their car, and stuff like that. And the person doesn't even know you exist. And it's very haunting when you understand that. But for people like that, if a stalking progresses into homicide, it's like the consummation of that process where you and that person are officially bound together forever. You look one name up and the other one is linked forever. And so, you know, it's disturbing, Chris, but that's the kind of personality I think we're dealing with. And then, of course, there's the infamy. A person, if he is guilty, you're talking about a person who studied criminology and who perhaps thought maybe one day this class will be reading about me. And so we talked in the profile about somebody who in the dark was a somebody, right? But in the world was a nobody. But he had total control in the darkness, you know, people asleep or that he thought were going to be asleep, you know, and under the cover of night, wearing it like a costume, right? That hid his pathos. And so that was the kind of person we envisioned. And then, of course, when Kohberger was identified, there was a lot of like, check, 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 you know, like he would have been like a pretty perfect fit for what we had in mind. And then as this information came out from Dateline, etc., it started to fit a little more. Now, you referred to the incident with the car, right? The
Yeah,
panic.
there were a couple. Remember, we talked about the cars and the dog. There was a skinning of a dog.
Yeah. And
Amongst
no one
peers.
has ever, to my knowledge, really ever given a satisfactory answer about that.
I agree.
And when we spoke to other experts, members of the Cold Case Foundation, etc., one of the things people were interested in is ways that somebody like this would have practiced and developed a relationship with his knife. We have to remember that the weapon for a person like this is like it's almost a phallic thing. It's like an extension of manhood in their mind, and they hone it and practice with it. And sometimes they keep it on their person when they go into a house, for example, where they're interacting with a young woman, where they know that at any moment, if they wanted to, they could pull that blade out and enact a fantasy. And the woman doesn't even know that it's in their pocket, right? So it's this kind of weird phallic substitute for some of them. And for some of them, it's a practice process where they'll use it to kill animals or cut things up or etc. because they want to feel attached to it and feel, you know, that their arm is complete, you know, with this weapon. And the incident you're talking about, which has never officially been linked to Kohberger, you know, as a suspect, but it's a very interesting one. I believe it occurred in March of the year of the murders. And the incident was something like this. There was a car a stone's throw away from the murder house, the Kings Row murder house, where a young woman owned the car. And she came out and she found that someone had gotten into the car and taken the contents of the vehicle and placed them inside of a suitcase and then put the suitcase outside of the vehicle. And her panties were sort of bunched up in the console or something like that, like sort of put on the console in a weird kind of display of some sort. And the first thought, of course, that I and Dr. Sam Burgess had when we heard this was, we hope that they were tested for semen. But what wound up happening was that, and we know this because of FOIA requests, you know, people, there was body cam footage and the whole thing. That basically what happened was the officers thought it was some kind of prank or a car robbery attempt that went awry, and nothing really happened. Nothing came out of it. For people like us who are looking at the escalation of an offender, that actually would be a pretty typical behavior, right? Taking somebody's panties, messing with them, being, you know, within you know, very close proximity to a home you're kind of spying on. One idea that I had, and I have never heard anybody say this before, Chris, so I'm totally going on a limb, and this is out on a limb, and this is totally hypothetical. But if Kohberger could be placed there in March, we don't know him to have been there in March, but we also know that he was studying remotely that semester and theoretically could have been out there looking at the school. Who knows, right? We don't know where he was. But if he could be placed there in March, perhaps this might be considered as a hypothesis. Remember that there's an accusation that Kohberger broke into a home, toyed with some property there to get a woman scared enough to want cameras. And then that was the ruse to come and install the cameras and then potentially be able to spy on her. Well, perhaps the idea was to commit this offense to frighten the women in the home at the King's Row house into wanting cameras there because of this break-in that had a sexualized quality to it. I'm curious about that. That is a ruse. That kind of ruse was used by offenders of the type Kohberger would be if he is guilty, the mastermind type of offender, right? And
Which is number
16,
18, 16
yes.
in
And
your
if he is guilty, one of the offenders that I believe he likely studied was Zodiac. And that is something we could talk about at great length. There are a few offenders I suspect that he looked at if he is guilty. There's been much speculation about BTK. I think one might argue that he used some techniques that are suggestive. He studied Bundy, and I think Zodiac. And one of the ruses that we know Zodiac used, if you believe that he committed the Cherry Joe Bates murder and the Kathleen Johns attack, was to mess with a woman's vehicle. And then when she became, this was pointed out to her that, her tire was wobbly or that the car wasn't going to start or whatever, he would be the rescuer that was going to help. Oh, I'll give you a ride. Oh, I'll walk with you. Don't worry. We'll go in my car. And this was a way of kind of making her believe that he was to help. Now, remember the accusation about the comment in the house? I'm here to help.
Yeah, I'm here to help.
Right. So that my suspicion is that part of the psychology of this particular offender, again, if he's guilty, is that it was this idea of coming in the guise of a helper and then being somebody that was actually going to, hurt you. And I'm very interested in people like that because, in my opinion, just a speculation, part of the psychology of that is that you're punishing a person for being stupid enough to trust you. So it's like a way of saying, I once trusted people. I believed people were good and they hurt me. And now you're the idiot that trusted someone and gets hurt. Ha ha. So that you wind up with that turning the tables quality. And notice who it would be toward. If there's any truth to any of this, it's toward women. And so this makes you wonder about who hurt him. So that's what I would say about that incident.
So interesting in your book on page 107, everybody, if you've not bought Dr. Brucato's book yet, you can still you order it on Amazon. And I know he gets embarrassed when I keep pitching his book, but I'm telling you, this is the Bible. And his co-author, Dr. Michael Stone, just passed away. Those two were just best of friends.
Sure.
Rest in peace for Michael and this. But category 16 says is the ranking for self-centered psychopathic individuals who commit 2 or more acts of extreme violence. They may include attempted or completed murders, but someone displaying a pattern of highly vicious acts even without homicide, such as intentionally disfiguring or crippling a victim, or can be categorized here as consequently. This will often be the most appropriate ranking for offenders who repeatedly commit sexual assaults with adults or children, but who do not kill their victims at some point. Now, it goes on to talk about that's not necessarily all that individual is not going to check each and every one of these categories, but that is, based on what we're learning, potentially a very strong personality profile of what's going on here.
Well, category 16 is very interesting because it is about as bad as you can get on the gradation scale without committing full-blown sexual assault or even necessarily committing homicide. And there are a lot of mass murderers, very vicious mass murderers that fall into that category because they're not impulsive. They're not, it's a plotted thing. And one thing that you can bet, if Kohberger is guilty, is that there was plotting and scheming about that attack for a long time. And going in was like D-Day. He would have gone in equipped with things that were, almost military style, like he was going on a mission. And he must have had some kind of illumination. We know that he had a sheath. There would have been dark clothing. He would have been prepared with whatever it is that helped him clean up or conceal blood. And so this was not an act of impulse. This was somebody who had a fantasy. And that is what gives more the flavor of a serial killer, is that there was some kind of a fantasy that got enacted. And then once you start hearing about fantasy being the motivation, you start thinking, why would they stop? They would be upset that it didn't go perfectly. They would keep doing it. And I think, of course, nothing went the way that it was planned. That's clear. I don't know, Chris, what your hypothesis is about that, but I think that if he were surveying the house in some way, he must have had to shut off whatever he was using to survey the house, so that the night of the murders, he was completely shocked to discover two of them awake, and eating, the DoorDash. Kaylee is there, because I can't help but think Maddie was the focus, that Kaylee was there with the dog and the whole thing. And I think that it kind of caught him off guard. And so we see this frenzied scene where nothing goes as planned, and the sheath gets left, and he's in a daze and strolls out and the whole thing. But the thing is, you and I, as being, basically normal people, we wouldn't understand that probably
Basically
normal. I mean, we're not, not that out there. But I think that the idea is that, it would be difficult for us to fathom that probably one of the primary feelings a person like this would have is, it didn't go the way I planned. I was out of control. I don't like that. That didn't go the way it was supposed to go. I feel weak, that kind of thing. And but the average person would be worried about his liberty or something like that. But you could picture this person going, what they're going to remember is, I screwed up.
Yeah, and this is why I'm going to play this little. It's only a minute or two long.
It looks like the scene is frozen in time still.
I mean, I'm not. This is look, the person can park right here, as an example, behind the house, and look in, and they could sit there for hours, and nobody would have even known they were there, and help other people to understand, from a psychological aspect of the, keeping it obviously a family show, and we're close to, Christmas. The fantasy buildup here. I mean, if let's say, we've got him coming back 12 separate times. At least they have a digital footprint of evidence showing that car or something, some device, and it may have even connected to the Wi-Fi within the house, which is a really interesting correlation to what you said about the other gal, that he had connected to her Wi-Fi as well.
Well, we don't know, but that's one of the accusations that was made at the level when the Dateline episode came out, as I understand it.
Yeah, and I'm sure that will come out to whatever it's going to be. But to your point, I see him using this as a platform of he's studying everything about this particular house, in my opinion. And that's why I even went back there and filmed this, because I just had this sense, this investigative intuition that said, hey, wait a minute, this guy's living back here somewhere.
Well, you have to understand that one of the aspects of offenders of this type that is often overlooked, in my opinion, and I've said this previously, is that they want a predictability in their relationships. that the people they've attempted to connect to leave them, dislike them, judge them, don't understand them, etc. There's certainly something about this person's personality where he's awkward socially, and when he tries to connect to people, he fails. Some people liked him, but it seemed that with people who were less predictable, or where the dynamic had a romantic or emotional quality to it, it would get him all weird and kind of activated. And so this kind of person would try to make a science out of emotion. Remember, for example, the project that Kohberger was doing at DeSales was to understand the emotion of people when they committed crime. This is the kind of person who would want to understand and reduce emotion in that scientific way. And
that is a really fascinating point to remember.
Yeah.
He was studying that.
That is right. He was studying that indeed. And what you want to understand is that's a perfect formula for a stalker, because a stalker is basically a person who is looking at another person as like a microbe in a petri dish, and observing them and studying them and learning about them and making a science out of them. It's almost like there's a fantasy that one day you're going to chat them up in a parking lot and go, you know what I like? And then name something they like because you spied on them, that kind of thing. So that there's no chance of the conversation being out of control. And so an individual like that starts to think, if I could just reduce you to a predictable science, or I could watch you all the time, I can control you being near me. You know what I'm saying? I can control you being part of me forever. And eventually, what a person like that could think is, if I kill you, then you'll really be part of me forever. And so there is even an intimacy that develops, sometimes a sexualized intimacy, as you get to know the person you're stalking, where the same way you would develop intimacy in a romantic relationship that was normal, the person starts to engage in sexualized acts alone, or to fantasize or pretend that they're having long conversations with you, or look at pictures of you, or keep images of you on the phone and things like that, so that there's this weird sense in their mind, we're getting closer and closer and closer and closer, and you're mine forever, that kind of thing. And when you really start to grasp that, you start to picture a person that thinks he's gaining control, but is actually deteriorating into more and more of a fantasy world, where they're spilling over and needing more and more and more to keep that fantasy going. And I personally, just as a side note, am devastated that they're tearing that house down. Because if I'm right, if this guy is involved, he was such a visual person that I think we'd have to go there and look at everything to kind of properly understand the layout and where he would have parked the vehicle, and trees he might have sat in, or how he might have stood on something to look through the window, or where he might have listened, or roads he might have figured out to use, or etc. And it just takes away the learning opportunity, and also the capacity to really drive home how horrible this was, the complete control that he felt that he had over the occupants of that house.
Just for a second, I hope somebody has contacts to the university. Just that statement alone, right there from Dr. Gary Brucato, who is world-renowned, just that statement alone, that he is visual, should prevent the university from tearing this house down until a trial is completed. And at that point, do whatever you need to do. But everybody, if you have any contacts, get back, please circle this video to the right hands, because what Dr. Brucato was saying, I have felt from the beginning as well, from an investigative aspect, and that's why I'm pointing to the windows here. This guy he's feeling the interior, he's feeling the exterior of this particular home. And I know some people are asking, Gary, what you felt, without knowing, obviously, the sequence of events could have been inside there, without speculating as well. But I, like you, and the whole reason for tonight's program, I don't think they should be tearing this house down yet. And when you just said what you said, it just even brought it clearer to me.
Oh yeah. Well, I think my guess is that there's a psychological trauma to the entire university and a desire to take this whole thing and bury it. But the problem is that the wound is still fresh. There's no justice yet, and and it may take a little while. I just think that it's a gigantic piece of evidence. I mean, getting rid of houses that have been involved in unsolved murders is never a good idea. For example, you remember that in the 19th century there was the Lizzie Borden case, which is still technically cold, although everybody, who looks at it probably would conclude that Lizzie did it. I certainly have. Although she was acquitted for many foolish reasons. And I can tell you that only a few years ago, experts went into that house and were able to find traces of blood in a place that in the floorboards that nobody had thought to would ever be there.
And I just covered that while you were offline here as exculpatory evidence. I'll guarantee you during the trial there's going to be a motion somewhere. The defense is going to say, I want to go back to that house. Oh wait, we can't go back to the house. But they're going to be the first ones in line to say tear it down. And folks, can you do me a favor? Can you hit the like button? Everybody, we got 2,500 people in here right now. The algorithm will share this video further and further if we do that. Okay? It's not for me, quite frankly. It's for this information needs to get out before the 28th of December, before a bulldozer pulls up there and this is gone. But go ahead, finish your thought, Gary.
That's all I'm saying is that the right people in that house could milk it for additional evidence. I'm certain. I mean, we still don't have a clear picture of what went on in that house, where cleanup occurred, where there might have been DNA in the nooks and crannies. I just think it's premature to tear it down, and I don't understand beyond psychological reasons what the practical reason is to do it.
Okay, so let's see, microchemy. Do you think the spilled dirt by the plant on the kitchen sink was spine device he retrieved on his way out? I noticed it early on. That was my first assumption.
I don't know, but I would be very surprised if we didn't find out that there was some mechanism of surveying that house. This is a person whose entire psychology points to a process of meticulous surveillance, like someone who fancies himself like, a little CIA kind of going in there and able to listen or look. And if he didn't have a sophisticated way of doing it, he would have done it simply by pulling the car up or, and basically finding a way to look in. I can tell you and Chris, you can vouch for this, there are offenders of this type who will, and Greg Cooper has said so, who will even go into the house when people are sleeping and stare at them as a practice run, and they get a kind of a sense of power about the idea that you don't know they're there. I mean, there are offenders that have even touched people in their sleep, right? Touched their locks of their hair or moved things around and then, just for fun, taken something. And, so you want to understand that it's very improbable that this person was not in that house before, at least virtually, but probably literally, and would have really known the layout, wouldn't you say, Chris? There's certainly indications of a familiarity and a comfort in that house.
Yeah, and the fact that there was a reputation on campus that, it was a wild house, for lack of a better term, in terms of where everybody went to party. Sometimes there are multiple, it's no secret that the cops went there for parties and that kind of stuff. It wouldn't surprise me, I mean, that he was kind of that guy that would just sneak in, just kind of be a fly on the wall and everybody be like, who's this guy? Right, Gary? I mean, wouldn't he would have stuck out with his sore thumb?
Well, because this is such a, this kind of a person, how do I explain this? This kind of a person would enjoy that while you were thinking that he was invisible and powerless, he was taking advantage of his invisibility power by which he perceived he had by kind of spying on you or slipping in, so that you take this invisibility and you use it to your advantage. So you don't know I'm there, so I'm going to slither like a snake underneath you and hurt you. And then you'll see who's powerful and who's present, that kind of thing. And so that and again, there's that whole idea of you invite me in and then I hurt you, right? So was he invited to a party? Did he slip into a party? Did he look like a guest and was actually walking around getting ideas? I don't know. What I'm also very interested to find out is, did he know the target well before he even got to Wash U? Did he discover the person on the internet and choose the school because of a desire to be near that person? How did he first encounter that individual? And if I had to make an educated guess, it was probably online and, social media, something like that. And what you would picture is this sort of pathetic attempt to connect to the person, thinking that they're reading your messages when they're not. They're going to some extra inbox where weirdo messages go, right, that you never even look at, or sending a message where you're calling somebody cute or something and they don't even pay attention to it, right? Something like that. But what you want to get is that in the mind of that kind of individual, there is a misreading of the reaction as being bigger than it is, right? I've had encounters with people, for example, that will say something like, I have a close personal relationship with the Pope. And I'll say, really? Tell me all about it. Well, I wrote him a letter and I got back a letter from him, right from the Vatican. And I'll say, really? What did it say? Dear sir or madam, thank you for writing to His Holiness. We will be sure that he, prays over your letter. Thank you so much for your interest, right? So it's like the person interprets like a form letter as indicating that they've entered into a personal relationship. And in psychiatry, when that kind of relationship goes over the edge, and I'm not saying that's what happened here, but when that kind of relationship goes far enough, you can even develop what's called an erotomanic delusion, right? Where you psychotically believe that this person knows you're alive and is in a relationship with you, and they don't even know you exist, right? Or they don't care about you at all. If you sort of take that down a notch out of the realm of psychosis and just into a kind of a weird interpersonal style, I think that's what you had going on here. I think that he thought he had a special connection with someone who didn't know he was alive, was completely obsessed with the person, and planned to consume them. And unfortunately for him, it did not work out at all. And, the simplest way I'll put it about the house is there could be no bigger gift to the defense than to tear that house down.
I concur. I just think there's going to be one of those moments. And Gail, to answer your question, I saw your question about the glove. And to be honest with you, I don't know. It was a chance encounter that day, and there it was. I pointed it out to the police officer. He pointed it out to the evidence folks, and my understanding is they had collected it. So, sometimes the universe is on schedule, but we won't find out if that thing has any relevance. One thing that did strike me, and I saw on the news, the two trash cans out front, they're still in the same position. I mean, they have dismantled that house, but nobody's gone to the trash cans and moved them. And that tells me something, personally, from an investigative aspect, is, what's going on with the folks around there that, they froze everything in time, and those two trash cans are still out there. If you look at, some of the latest news reports, they're not moving the trash cans, but they want to knock the house down. It doesn't make any sense. And I think this is such a narrow thought process going on at that university. And I'll guarantee you it's being driven by the administrative staff. By the way, Gary, I shared in the very beginning of the show about, our UNLV thing, situation and experience. And I told everybody about last Sunday. So just, so Yeah, it's out there now. But anyway, I thought that is so telling that they're going to tear that house down, and for what? My thinking is once it's gone, now all of a sudden all bets are off for the defense. They can just start making, theory after theory after theory, and well, this is exculpatory. We can tie this. We can do this. What about this? And next thing you know it, you have just a barrage of motions, during the trial that are all going to be tied to, well, Your Honor, we would have loved to go and see it just to make sure. And this is how it will be phrased, just to make sure. But we can't. So it's exculpatory and it has to be leaned against our client here. I mean, just think if they would have tore down Susan Morphew's house, right? Because she's disappeared. And I'm telling you, it may feel good right now, but if justice isn't given, it's going to do more harm than good.
I mean, Chris, it is plausible that the university communicated with the parents and families of the victims and they wanted it gone, but I don't know. I haven't seen anything like that. Do you know if the families had anything to do with the choice, or were they asked?
I think the families, were consulted and asked, hey, we're doing this. How do you feel? I mean, what's a family going to say? Well, you guys know better. You're the state. You're the FBI. You're, Idaho State Police. You're Moscow Police. You got all the evidence. Well, guess what? I mean, I worked over 300 murders. I mean, you know that, Gary. And I'm here to tell you, I don't have all the answers. And just like this question here, like Crime Solver, why do you think there's such overwhelming YouTube presence proving BK's innocent in conspiracy? Is it because we can't fathom the evil that someone would do this?
Well, this is a very complicated question. First of all, we all need to be, always have an open mind when somebody is only a suspect. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. And I mean, this is, after all, the United States, and a person is innocent until proven guilty. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when the evidence becomes so overwhelming that to take issue with it starts to look like simply trying to be a contrarian. And I have had the unfortunate experience in my lifetime of learning that there are some people who mistake simply opposing anything that is posited to them as a sign of intelligence. They think that simply saying, I don't agree with that, let's ask questions, makes them look smart. But sometimes a person could do that to his or her detriment, because the evidence is so strong that it starts to look ridiculous. What I also think sometimes happens is, in addition to some people just wanting to be contrarian or have weird conspiracy theories, I mean, there's no accounting for the whacked out logic that characterizes, a good chunk of the population these days. But I also think that what sometimes happens is people fall for the personality structure of an offender and are charmed and manipulated even from afar. And some of them can even develop a strange attraction or attachment to the person where they defend the offender at all costs. Because logic has to be twisted, into a pretzel to deny the reality that this person, could be bad. And this happens because of what I call in the new evil a false compassion, where you start to develop sympathy for the accused and not for the victims. This is unfortunately very characteristic of the narcissistic culture in which we live. The externalization of blame and the swapping of everything, so you feel more sorry for the bad person than the good person. And so, I can't tell you how much of this I have to deal with in my lifetime. The person who says, how dare you say that my boyfriend is bad just because he walked up to an elderly man with a 4x4, beat him over the head and stole his money. He's a good boy. He's a good man. He was hurt in his lifetime. And meanwhile, the person is like bloodied, and had their money stolen, so that I think what has happened is that attempts to understand offenders psychologically in the interest of stopping them has been mistaken for let's understand them so we can have sympathy. And that starts to sound an awful lot like making excuses. So, but of course, let's wait to see if somebody is guilty before we start to say things like that. But I get very irritated about the support of the offenders, and even worse, the celebration of them, because you can bet when that house is torn down, there will be people taking pieces of it as perverse souvenirs and objects to sell all over the internet, murderabilia, floorboards, pieces of the house, things like that. You can bet that those things will be sold.
Yeah, and they'll be looking for that one blood spot because that will increase the value.
Right. It's like a perversion of the idea of a religious relic, like where a religious person wants an object that was touched by a saint. The idea is, I want an object that was touched by the hands that killed. Right. It's a sort of bizarre thing. But there are people like this, when you're living in a world where good is evil and, and evil is good and everything's been turned upside down. It's not surprising that people would go down the path of thinking that somebody is spectacular because he's killed, that kind of thing.
That I think I gave the example of, the bathroom where Matthew Checky was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And
what an awful story that is.
And the city waited. They asked me, what do we do? And I said, wait till the trial's over and then do what you got to do. And families are all, unfortunately, put into an extremely bad position because they're mourning their loved ones. They're desperate to have a court trial and justice, yet they want to make sure that they support the system. So they go and they talk to, attorneys, and attorneys say, don't worry, we got this. Okay. And then they say, okay, but we're going to do A, B, C, and D, i.e. we're going to tear the house down. We've got all this physical evidence, we've collected everything, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I can't tell you how many times you get to trial. And let's just use Murdoch as a perfect example. And all of a sudden you have a clerk who wrote a book. And immediately Harpoolian and all these other guys jump in and they say, oh, we need a new trial based on what they did. And I'm here to tell you, until that, they didn't mow down his farm, which I guess the person that buys it, maybe they will. But here's my point. It is horrible. Right now, it's horrible no matter what you do. Even if the victims' brothers and sisters, aunts, uncles, grandmothers, etc. I had 16 people from a family standing over Matthew Checky in that bathroom. Remember, they were down there camping. And every single family member ran into that bathroom to help that little boy. 16 family members. Everybody wanted that bathroom gone. And I sat down with them and I said to them, actually Billy Robards did on my behalf. He said, look, you've got to trust us right now in the system. Let's let justice play out. And when that death penalty verdict came back, death, and Brandon Wilson was on death row now, they looked at me and they were like, thank you. And I just gave them a wave. And quite frankly, that's how we all left it. But at the same time, it was at that point the city made the decision to tear the building down and remodel it. That's when this should happen, at the conclusion of everything. I get everybody's feelings. We all have feelings. Trust me. But those feelings can change rapidly if justice is not done. Rapidly. And then those feelings become eternal. There's no closure. There's no closure. And That's what we're trying. I think the university needs to think through and go, you know what? Okay, well, how many students aren't coming here because the house is still up? Well, how many students are not going to go there knowing that there's a reflection pool that you can go to and think about the 4 deceased, individuals on your campus?
Right.
Yeah, that ain't going to work either, right? I mean, Dr. Gary, you're right down the street from the 9/11 memorial.
Right. But Chris, and it gets into a controversial topic, but the fact is that the tearing down of this house is occurring within a philosophical zeitgeist, the school of thought that pervades the culture right now, which is the idea that you revise anything that is unpleasant to look at out of history by taking the remnants of it and destroying it, because you just don't want to remember that thing happened. But as Diana famously said, those who don't remember history are doomed to repeat it. And the reason that we keep things in our culture that are hideous to look at is not because we celebrate them, but because they're necessary reminders of where we could wind up again. And what you're seeing that shouldn't shock people is, as we destroy painful remnants of the past, history almost seems to be winding backwards to some of the most awful places we were in the past 150 years or so. And so, this doesn't shock me. But so that I think what this whole idea of let's get rid of this because it's an ugly reminder, it's missing the point that you need it as a reminder to achieve justice and prevent any such thing from occurring again. And if you get rid of it prematurely, I think that point is missed. But I always like to see things within those wider contexts, and but that is a trend, actually. The let's get rid of everything that's ugly and from the past.
Yeah, we're in 1939. Everybody knows it. Everybody can feel it. And, just think if they would have gotten rid of Dachau or Auschwitz, where the world would have been after World War II. If you ever want to see suffering and pain, just visit one of those 2 locations in the world, and that will prevent others. And you're 100% right. In my opinion, the evidence right now is that house. That house is evidence. It is evidence. And you do not destroy evidence in the name of a memorial yet. You don't do it. That's just my opinion. I've been in this game 42 years. I had a 93% success rate, conviction rate. If you feel that you guys need to knock it down, knock it down. I would advise against it. I'm on that camp. I know there's a split between some of the investigators that, agree. And then, of course, there's always the other side of, let's make everybody feel right. Okay. Everybody's going to feel right when, you go through the process. And that's when everybody feels right, because right now, the process hasn't even begun yet. There's not even a trial date.
Right. But Chris, just to kind of reiterate the idea that this is part of a trend, the whole point of the contemporary culture is to do whatever it is that feels good instead of whatever it is that makes you be good. And that's the whole thing. It may be unpleasant on a guttural, visceral level to look at something, but you may need to look at it to be a better person. That's the whole idea. And so that, to me, it has
That's
to
a
be
great point.
in that context. But
Yeah, that is a great point. How many people go to Pearl Harbor every year in Hawaii? How many people go to the 9/11 memorial every year in New York City? That's because good people go there to reflect on being better. That is a great point.
Right.
And right now, until there's justice, I don't see that happening. Well, Dr. Gary, I was surprised that you came up. We're 2 hours into this.
Okay.
And I really appreciate you always being here. Now, we've got another show coming up, not next week because it's Christmas Eve,
That's right.
but the week after that, called Manifesto.
Mhm.
If you guys do not know that about my friend over here, he not only has this book, but he's also writing many others and a tremendous amount of research. He's got the largest mass murder research from Columbia University with over 119 years of data. Okay?
Right.
And it's
the largest ever done.
yeah, and it's kind of funny because every once in a while we'll start talking about some of my old murders, and he'll be like, "Just a minute," and he goes, "Oh yeah, this is that," and I'm like, "You have that?" Yeah, I got it, and I'm like, oh, "Holy cow!" I've got that cold.
I know it well. That I have that same cough, Chris.
Anyway, but
Yeah.
as you can tell, he's an amazing human being. And if you've not bought his book, get over. I keep pitching it for him. I told him I do this on my own. He's never asked me because it's such a fascinating read. It's absolutely fascinating with Ann's book, Killer by Design.
Well, Chris, people keep asking questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to take a couple minutes.
Sure. Which one you want to answer?
One thing that I'll address, because it's been asked a few times, is about, if there's a case that fascinates me as a person. I love being called the new Columbo. I can't tell if I'm more I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan. I mean, anybody who knows me knows my home is filled. I mean, here's one of my many little Sherlocks. But I also am an enormous Columbo fan, and I like that they have. I always say when I teach, there's the Columbo method, right, and then the Holmes method. They're very different, and I love the Columbo method because the idea is to appear befuddled and sort of like you're randomly asking meaningless questions, but you're actually getting somebody off guard and breaking things down, and then catching subtle inconsistencies and gnawing on them like a dog until you finally get the person to screw up. And we all know just one more thing, that he would always have, right? And then that boom, it would be solved. But just to get back to this question about cases that interest me. So what I am currently writing about is cases that haunt me as a person, right? The cases that I've examined, historical cases, cold cases, things like that are just so bizarre or awful that they require special commentary, right? And to really delve into them. And so I picked 20 cases or so from my records that I wanted to find things that people probably never heard of, right? Instead of reading about the usual suspects, the usual gang. Really, really bizarre, horrifying, disturbing cases where people, I think, would be really interested to hear opinions on what was going on in them. So, rather than give an example of a case that fascinates me, I'll simply say, stay tuned until the book comes out. And I like it because it'll allow me to possibly even do a series, because people like that 20, the horrifying inventiveness of people never stops yielding new cases. So there'll always be plenty more to write about. It doesn't have a name yet, but I'm thinking I'm going to call it Traveler in the Darkness.
I love it. Yeah, we've talked about some of his cases too, and they're too crazy for YouTube, to be honest with you. But it'll be an amazing read. An amazing read. Let's see here. What else? You're going to be the new Columbo.
Right, Columbia.
Do you have a Columbo coat? You have a rain jacket?
I do not, but I definitely have the rumpled, the disorganized look of Columbo sometimes. But that is very funny. I love being compared to any of these people because they're heroes of mine. But if anybody is Columbo like Chris, it's more you. I mean, you're a real gumshoe. I'm a clinician, so
I got lucky. I did used to use that line. every once in a while I said, I have one more question.
Yeah, just one more thing. Now, do people have any questions about the Kohberger case that they might want to ask while there's an opportunity? Thank you. That's very sweet of you. I see the comments. Any questions at all? I'd be happy to answer.
You need a dog.
I would love to have a dog, but I'm
Buddy,
allergic to everything.
Buddy's next door, right here, down below me here, but he's making gas. It's unbelievable for little Jack Russell. This guy, he's horrible. Like, how about the Brucato Bible?
Oh yeah. Well, according to you, that we've already got that with the new evil. So Maxine asks, do we think that Kohberger acted alone? First of all, if Kohberger is guilty, I think it's very, very important to keep saying that, because I do feel that the media so inundated everybody with information about him, it's going to be very difficult to get a trial where you have a pool of people who have a neutral opinion. But I'm sure they'll be able to. But the answer to that is, if he is guilty, yes, I absolutely believe he acted alone. I believe that he is by definition a loner, a person who could not form an alliance with a person that was appropriate. If he were able to form a criminal alliance with somebody, he wouldn't have to do this. It would mean that he could form a connection with a human being that he could trust. And so the answer is, I think by definition, this person is a loner. Oh, I've got to answer this question about Sherlock. I always wonder if Sherlock ever loved Irene, if he was just in awe of her. No, it is very clear that Sherlock had no romantic interest in anyone. He was simply fascinated that he was able to be outsmarted by somebody, and then for the person who outsmarted him to be a woman, when he had a not particularly good opinion of women, as the stories tell us, shocked him so much that he held her, Irena Adler, in a very special place in his heart, and kept her photo and so forth. But no, I do not believe he was ever in love with anybody. And no, I do not. I believe Sherlock Holmes was asexual and arguably on the spectrum, if anybody wonders what I think of Sherlock. Any other questions here? Anything else?
Let's see.
They've got a good opportunity here to ask anything they want of the two of us. So I hope people will come up with. Do you guys believe that anyone in Bryan's family there has contacted law enforcement? Chris, what do you think about that?
I think the sisters were suspicious early on. They mentioned it. Obviously, and there was some discussion somewhere that brought out, well, maybe he did. Maybe he is involved. And that kind of hit the environment, and where it went from there is, anybody's guess, to the point where maybe she knew or one of them knew. I think that, the family had to be suspicious of, he's back, he's cleaning the car. And I think that's what really set the sisters off.
Some behavior that was peculiar. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that was alluded to in the Dateline episode.
Yeah. Well, do you think he's killed before, Gary?
I personally do not, but if he is the killer, I do not think so. But I do think that this is somebody who would have gone on potentially to kill again. He seems to have that structure, but there is no indication whatsoever that he has previously killed, if he is guilty.
So I'm trying to catch this one question here about stalking.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. Where did it go?
Oh, somebody is asking about the fuzziness that he describes in his writings online. Do you want me to address that?
Sure. Oh, here it is.
You read Kohberger's writings, he talks about a whole soup of symptoms that he was experiencing. And one of them is this kind of pixelated visual snow kind of thing. And there's a lot of describing of what really seems to refer to dissociation right? Derealization, where the world doesn't seem real. Depersonalization, where you look at yourself and you don't know if you're a real person. Remember, he talks about looking in the mirror and thinking he's like turning into meat, or that other people are turning into meat, which, by the way, is extremely interesting given that he became a vegan. We don't know how that figures in to somebody making that kind of remark about meat. So that you get this idea of like the world is not real, right? And that can happen in people who are extremely stressed. That can, or traumatized. That can happen in people who are using drugs or alcohol. That can happen in people who are a little psychotic or are developing psychosis. Can experience that kind of fuzziness or detachment. But whatever the reason is, I think it was that fuzziness that was part of why that sheath got left and why he looked as dazed when he strolled out past the one of the two women who was not killed. Because I think that somebody sort of pumped with adrenaline and kind of dazed and dissociated, strolling out, would have had that kind of look, and that's sort of how he was described as being, if I recall, as being kind of dazed. And so I think it's interesting to think about that he describes dissociation and this visual snow phenomenon. By the way, I heard about visual snow quite a lot when I was working at Columbia with people who were at risk for psychosis, people that were very early in the process of developing psychosis. A lot of them would describe that, but a lot of them didn't develop psychosis. They just turned out to be very, very anxious people. And so that I think that may be a phenomenon that might be associated with somebody who is very stressed or traumatized or, experiencing this kind of dissociative phenomenon. It's impossible to say that, Lisa. We would need a lot of history to be able to say that, because for somebody to be a psychopath, you would be looking at really a lifetime of delinquency that's going to start really young, and other behaviors that we simply don't have the information to answer. I mean, you could take like a hair psychopathy checklist and kind of check off a couple things, but you would not have enough information to answer. Why do you believe Maddie was the target? That is an extremely complicated question. We'd be here all night. But Chris, do you also have the conclusion that Maddie was likely the target?
I think Maddie was definitely in the sights. At the same time, though, I think once he got in there, he realized. And again, we've talked about sequence, top to bottom, middle to top.
Yes.
And that would also play into, that target list. I think Maddie was on the edge of the bed, and so she took the brunt of the majority of the assault initially. Or Kaylee, I can't remember who was. I think Kaylee was on the other side and Maddie was on the end. And I think that's why she took that corner that came out and said all the things that she said in the very beginning. What a mistake that was.
Well, you remember that there is this idea that Kohberger was masquerading as Papa Roger on the internet. And one of the things I seem to remember Papa Roger saying was that whereas people were speculating that there was a little extra violence with Kaylee, leading to the conclusion that she was the target, was incorrect, because according to Papa Roger, the only reason that there was such brutality with Kaylee was that she was last and the blade had become dull.
Yeah.
Now, so that by implication, if she was not the target, then you start wondering if it was Maddie in that room. And the other two, that I hate to say it, but I think that they were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't believe that Ethan and Zane, I don't believe that they figured at all into what was planned, but they just sort of bedeviled him by being there when he arrived. And then, if Papa Roger is to be believed, I mean, the target was not Kaylee.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that I'm most interested to find out is if he started out coming in the front and going up to the second floor, eliminating the victims there and then moving upstairs, or if he came in from the top and worked his way down. But so far, logic is pointing in the direction of moving up. But I don't know what you think, Chris.
Well, I think, guys and gals, I think we'll know those answers obviously through the blood spatter analysis. We can definitely say that all 4 victims were slaughtered.
Mm-hmm.
And, to get that type of adrenaline going and maintain it for 4 is a very high threshold. And so there's a lot going on with, fighting, with a lot of exhaustion going on there, not only for the suspect, but with the victims themselves. And if he hits some, major arteries or something to that effect,
Mm-hmm.
then of course, it's his, and he could do whatever he wanted. I think there's going to be an extremely brutal testimony about the savagery that was perpetrated in that house. And this is even reason number 10,465 to keep that house. Because once that testimony comes out and those photos are seen, jurors, I can tell you, jurors want justice at that point. And they want to go and they want to make sure they're bringing justice, whatever direction that is, for Kohberger or for the girls and the victims and Ethan. Either way, okay, they're going to want to do that. And this is why I just think it's foolish for the university to even be considering tearing that house down yet, all in the name of feelings at this point.
Right.
Well, the students will feel better. Okay, great. Guess whose feelings aren't in existence anymore? Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan. They don't have feelings, folks, anymore. Those feelings are eternally projected to God. They're with God right now. They're with my son right now on the other side of the veil, whatever that means for each individual. If I was one of those parents, and I've been a parent of a deceased child, I would look at the DA and say, don't you dare knock that house down until this trial is over. Don't do it. Don't do it. And, if they come up and they say, well, we've got all this other stuff, technology, et cetera, so what? You cannot read the minds of 12 jurors, 15 total in the box. You don't know what they're thinking, and you don't know what questions they're going to ask. And that's just a little too cocky to go into court like we got this. Nobody knows. Nobody would have said that, et cetera. Murdoch's clerk would stand up and say, oh, by the way, and who would have predicted that? Honestly, that was a high profile murder. Guess what? Fortunately, they had the T's crossed and the I's dotted. Who would have projected that the DA in the Suzanne Morphew case was going to get hammered for going on YouTube? Who would have predicted that? Okay, that's why the justice system is called a system. Let it work and let it go through the system. And when it's done, then do whatever you need to do. I guarantee you, your registration rates will go through the roof. I talked to my son the other day, and even at UNLV, they're thinking about tearing down the economics building, the Lee Hall School of the business school. And I was like, okay, well, really? And this is where we're at. this is where we're at. And, at some point it may backfire. And if this is the one that it backfires on, God forbid the next 4 victims, families, they're going to need help. And that's just my feeling. I've got a couple more questions here for you too, Gary. They're popping up left and right.
Yeah.
After
I do feel compelled to say, by the way, based on some of the comments, that just to clarify, yes, it is true that visual snow can occur in the context of migraines, but it's important to point out that in the writings about visual snow that Kohberger apparently posted online, I don't recall him making mention of them being associated with migraines. A person who is having visual snow with migraines, who might mention if he had been assessed and determined if they were associated, but he appeared much more perplexed that they really didn't make any sense to him, and was that it was more of a scary thing. I mean, he was so hopeless, that he was basically talking about being gobbled up in the dysphoria associated with the sense of brokenness that he was experiencing. And that one of the great tragedies of this case is that if he is guilty, there probably was a window of time when he was groping for somebody to pay attention to him or talk to him, and he seems to have kind of slipped through the cracks, which is a shame.
I'll answer this with, I wish they would call Dr. Brucato in to do an assessment on him.
Well, I'd sure love to meet him, not because I think he's fascinating, but simply because I think that I think I'd be able to get him to open up. And I believe that ultimately, if he is found guilty, he will talk. I mean, this is the kind of person that, if he's found guilty, would probably write a personal account, because it would annoy him that other people would get all the facts wrong. That he'd want to get the history down of himself, and would like the idea that there were people writing him fan letters and all of that. But that's my sense.
Gary, one thought. Fan letters. Do you have the Christmas card?
Oh, the Susan Smith one?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't have it handy here, but I what Chris is talking about is I showed.
Do you have it? You don't have it handy?
I can go across the place to get it now, because I moved it somewhere. But what Chris is talking about is that I showed him that a Christmas card from Susan Smith, and I receive correspondence or exchange correspondence with a wide array of people that are incarcerated. Because sometimes when I write about people, I want to know things about them, and I ask them, and sometimes they're very flattered or whatever. And I've had some really weird encounters where I'm contacted by offenders. I'll tell you one of my favorite Michael Stone stories since he just passed away. We went to present at Boston College with Ann Burgess, Dr. Burgess, because I'm a visiting scholar there, and Michael and I were, but I wasn't yet at the time. But we were forging a relationship with Boston College. We went up there to give a talk, and somehow, by some mechanism that I don't understand, one of the speakers who had a close relationship with the sexually sadistic serial killer Lawrence Bittaker, the one who used to go around in the van with Ray Norris, pick up women and torture them in California, he placed a call through to the other speaker that he desperately wanted to speak to me and Michael. And what it is that he wanted to communicate to us is that he was annoyed at his ranking in the scale after having read The New Evil. And what bothered him, what he wanted to talk about, was that he had the idea that the scale should be kind of like a thermometer, where like on any given day you can move to a lower or higher score on the scale, instead of understanding that the ranking has to do with like the worst thing you've ever done frozen in time. So he achieved 22 and was a 22 until the day he was placed into the earth, But I always thought that was very interesting. And there are a lot of serial killers who become familiar with The New Evil, and then I sometimes hear from them. It horrifies me to think that there are offenders that are able to get a copy, whether it's electronic or somebody brings it in. I don't know how it happens, but they hear, and sometimes they see me talk on programs. I don't know how they have access to the internet. Simply, they probably do in some places, and they contact me, and sometimes they say, I want to volunteer myself so that you can learn about me, which is like code language for I want to be interesting to you so that you can tell the world about me and I can be fascinating, right? But sometimes they claim they want to help. And sometimes they are amused by shocking you. They'll send you letters that are disturbing. I mean, absolutely disturbing. And anybody who has corresponded with offenders knows that one of the most interesting things about letters from serial offenders is the following. It is that um, they are very banal in what they say. You would think that they'd be talking about all the horrendous details of crimes and things, but they want to talk about things like the weather, the food that they're eating. They're annoyed that they don't have postage stamps and cigarettes and things like that. And I have loads of letters from offenders, everybody from Jody Arias, to on to all across the board, where they just talk about this mundane stuff.
We should do a letters night. Dear Gary. Well, I'm teasing.
Well, you write to them and they'll often respond. But I've got letters from all kinds of people: James Holmes, the Aurora shooter, things like that. Sometimes they're revealing, but for the most part, they're pretty mundane.
Okay, so the next program we're going to do, everybody, and if you're new to our channel, please just hit the subscribe button. That's all we and the like button. We got 2,600, almost 2,700 people in here. Just hit that like button. That way, the algorithm takes it. We would really, really grateful if you did that. If you don't have Dr. Brucato's book, get to Amazon. I know it's back ordered, probably for Christmas. But Gary, I mean, when are they running? Your publisher running another reprint?
No, constantly being printed, But I'll tell you, Chris, without getting into detail,
Yeah.
one of the things that has haunted me is the possibility, I would even say probability, that Kohberger would have had my book. And it is interesting to bear in mind that he would have known, for example, that his professor was one of the recommenders of the book, who wrote in a few places about the book. It would have been very easy for him to find it if he was, for example, looking up his own instructor or whatever. It would have linked him at some point to the book. And this horrifies me because this is somebody who I think was studying books related to criminology, certain offenders, and that would have been of interest to him. And I shiver at the thought, but I know that there are offenders who are almost certainly reading The New Evil. I remember when I wrote it, Vernon Gayberth, the great venerable Vernon Gayberth, telling me in a phone call, you better watch out because the day will come when some law enforcement person calls you up and tells you this killer had a copy of your book. And many of my colleagues who have written books that became prominent in the true crime, criminology, forensic psychology world have had that experience of their books being found in the possession of offenders, because the fact is they study these things, and sometimes say, wow, I never would have thought of that. For example, anybody who's familiar with the case of David Parker Ray, which I say in The New Evil is the worst case I've ever heard of, you would know that David Parker Ray got the idea for one of his worst torture implements from Cameron Hooker, from the serial killer Cameron Hooker. Read about him and said, that's a great idea, and then created a similar torture device, right? So
Wow.
that sometimes offenders learn from the experience of other offenders. So I do have a dread that he may have had a copy of The New Evil. Time will tell, but that does bother me.
So you want to grab this from Muddy Paws?
No, I don't think so. I think that the nature of an individual like this is that there is an original object, what I call the prototype, and then you go out to find someone who beautifully fits that prototype to enact a fantasy, but you can just as easily find another one. And so that the idea is that if you look at the victims of a serial offender, you might make the argument that they are over and over again killing the same person symbolically, right? So different surrogate victims, but they are all projections of the same, or really displacements would be the right word, displacements of that same original source. And so I think a person of this type would probably just move to the next. And anyone in the audience who has ever known a person who becomes obsessed in relationships, that deeply obsessed, the kind of person who can't get someone out of their mind 24/7 in an almost pathological way, when you're listening to them that a year later they're going to be obsessing over somebody else as if the first person didn't even exist. And the person's going, I can't live without them, and they know everything about them, but a year later it's another person. Right. So it's sort of strange how that works.
Fascinating. Again, it's like every time I listen to you, and I hope everybody else agrees with me in the chat, this is a master class, isn't it? I mean, we're sitting with a really, and I've known you for a while, and every time I listen to you, and by the way, we're gonna speaking of Elliot Rogers, we're going to do in a couple of weeks, we're doing a show on manifestos, and Elliot is going to be part of that breakdown, because I know you have extensive information about him as well. And so that I want to go back to Gia's question though. Do you think serial killers are born that way?
Well, first of all, assuming the question is being asked generally and not in relation to Kohberger, because first of all, Kohberger is not accused of being a serial killer. We're simply saying that if he is guilty of the mass murder that occurred in the Idaho house, that he actually has a lot of the personality traits, it appears, and the qualities of the type of offender who progresses to enact. Because remember, we don't think that he went in there to commit a mass murder. We think he went in there to commit probably a single murder, and probably was the type of person who would have wanted to keep perfecting it, but we don't know for sure. Regarding serial killers generally, first of all, look, how am I going to give the short answer on this, Chris? We got all night here. Let me give the quick
the Reader's Digest version.
I'm going to give the Reader's Digest version. Okay, although Reader's Digest would never include a story about this. First of all, it depends what you mean by serial killer. There are different types. Remember that the current definition doesn't even require that the killing is in the service of abnormal psychological gratification. So like a person bumping off the owners of like restaurants that they're robbing would be a serial killer, right? But if you mean serial killer in the original sense, where there's a perverse fantasy being played out, then there are different types of those too. The vast majority of them are going to be sexually oriented. Now, I will tell you that the word serial killer, the phrase serial killer, really originally had nothing to do with killing in a sequence. It had nothing to do with killing in a serial, in a sequence. It had to do with serials, which were those little movies they used to show before the main feature in the 1930s and 1940s. They were called cliffhangers or chapter plays or serials, like The Lone Ranger or Charlie Chan or one of those kinds of things. Flash Gordon, the Green Hornet, the Green Lantern. They would show these little serials, and the idea was that the people who started to study these offenses said, gee, these killers are almost like caricatures of evil, like the villains in those serials. They're like serial killers, right? They might as well have called them cliffhanger killers or chapter play killers, right? And so that was the original idea, to capture that perverse psychology of the killer. But now we've lost that, and we think it's just about the sequence, right? And so people get very confused. But anyway, so I think the answer to that is, I have seen I would tell you the other people who study this have seen very few serial killers of the type we mean with the perverse psychology, that don't have at least something in their life, in their childhood, in their formative years, that was extremely negative, that would have driven an individual in a dark direction. But what it looks like is that you need a mixture. You probably need some kind of psychopathic, aberrant, perhaps even paraphilic kind of brain. And then you need the bad treatment to come together, right? So let's say you have a brain that is sensation seeking and unafraid and callous and so forth, but you're treated well by the world. You might take those qualities and use them in a pro-social direction. You might be the person most willing to hurl yourself on a grenade to like save all your friends or something. But if you are treated badly by the world and you have that quality, that creates a soup, a recipe for disaster, because you now have a fearless, sensation-seeking, guiltless person who is angry and will then take that and go on a mission to kind of level the playing field. And so what I think is that they're not necessarily born killers, but I think they're probably born with some of the ingredients that make them fearless and sensation seeking and callous and unable to experience emotion in the same way. But whether that's used in a good way or a bad way is dependent upon how the world treats you. And this reminds me of when Truman Capote, if you read In Cold Blood, when he befriended one of the killers, the Dick and Perry case, he in Kansas, and he said, it's like we grew up in the same house, but I went out the front door and he went out the back. So it's that idea of like the influence of the people around you can take the same kind of style and push it in a good direction or bad. And I think that's very true. Dr. Brucato, President of the board.
Is there any research on this question about either of the parents, influence in relationship to
in the Kohberger case?
No, just in general right now.
There's no question that the relationship with the parents seems to be extremely important in the formulation of people going on to become violent offenders, particularly of the repeat type. If Ann Burgess were here, she'd tell you that, you could count on a couple of hands the number of cases where you didn't have some kind of problem, whether it was a broken home, an absent father, an abusive parent, a neglect, alcoholism, or drug use in the home. But the idea is you have to picture people whose attachments are going to be all messed up because they didn't have those kind of predictable, normal, healthy relationships growing up. And so their understanding of people is essentially that, it's very transactional, and very fleeting and very, it's all about objectification and what can you do for me? I'm not interested in attaching to you permanently, right? Or I can't, even if I try to. But I mean none of that as an excuse, because remember that the vast majority of serial killers, less than point, if I remember correctly, less than 1% of them show signs of psychosis, and even some of the psychotic ones know what they're doing most of the time when they commit their offenses. The vast majority of them are simply morally depraved people who have fantasies that they feel entitled to play out. And that's why the notion of the crazy, quote unquote, violent offender is overblown. And in fact, I would say if you read the New York Times obituary on Michael Stone, which I think is in print tomorrow, you'll see that it says, Alan Francis says in there, that really the great contribution of Dr. Stone is that he helped people understand that your default position when thinking about violent crime shouldn't be, that's a mentally ill person. It should be, that is a person who does terrible things and is selfish and dark and capable of hurting other people because of moral bankruptcy. And we want to understand that, because otherwise we wind up in the false compassion position.
Is his piece coming out tomorrow in the New York Times?
The print edition is, I was very honored to be mentioned in it, which I think speaks to how closely we worked together in his later years. But yes, I believe the online edition came out already, and I believe the print edition is tomorrow in the New York Times.
Yeah, and it's again, Dr. Stone and Dr. Brucato, dear friends. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
colleagues, mentors. And what's interesting about this book is to what Dr. Brucato's talking about. People are evil. There are evil people out there. I mean, and this is the 22 categories of the most evil. And it's a fascinating. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Keep me on track here, but
Well, I think the way that Michael and I talk about it is we say that there are people who repetitively do things that fall into the category of what we call evil. But for a person to be evil is quite a rare thing. To say that a person is evil would imply that day in and day out, all day long, the person committed acts that would be considered evil. There are very few of those. Most of these people, bizarrely, fascinatingly, are actually capable of having friends and loved ones and coworkers that like them and the whole thing. And then they have this double life where they commit these atrocious acts. But there are people who commit evil acts so frequently that the people around them start to say, when I was around that person, I felt that I was in the presence of evil. But most of them, that's exactly what's frightening about them is that there's a touch of the humanity in them. In fact, I have frequently had the experience of talking to a person that has done things that are so atrocious. I mean, I can't say them here. And I walk away upset with myself because I liked them. The person was likable despite the things that they did, and they're sitting there telling you, and you're somehow managing to see humanity in there. And I have to tell you, there is, as John Ray has said on your show, sometimes when you see people like that, you remember that once upon a time they were innocent, they were children. I always say, when you hate a person, and I've used this technique myself, I tell my patients this: when you truly hate a person, find a picture of them as a little kid, and then you look at the picture of them as a little kid, and it's impossible to despise them, because you understand that they were once a child who went haywire. They became bad, but we all didn't start out that way.
that is a really solid point
Oh yeah.
that we all need to remember. Me today's ability just to immediately get on the keyboard and slash somebody without even knowing who that human being is. I mean, I think it's critical that we remember just that point. Well,
Oh,
I'll tell you what, we're 2 hours and 37 minutes into this.
it's been a joy. I hope you don't mind all the
Oh, no, no, no.
long-winded responses, but
Okay, so it's a holiday season. Dr. Stone, his New York Times is coming out about him tomorrow. So I'm going to give Dr. Brucato the last word. He didn't know it was coming, but and that way you can honor Dr. Michael Stone, a brilliant human being. I only got to meet him one time. He had spoke at a symposium in Wisconsin, a homicide symposium, and then I got to follow him, and I think half the room left when I got off teasing. But it was quite an honor to get to meet him. He was humble, extremely intelligent. You can see where the two of these guys could you imagine that dinner party? And by the way, if you're in Manhattan and you need to see a clinical psychologist, Dr. Brucato also takes patients. So please call his office. And if you're in that New York City area, he's right down the street where Rex Heuermann threw his pizza.
that's true. Although it's always better to.
Well, we thought, could he have been stalking you? Remember, we talked about that because he was right across from your office is where that pizza was dropped.
Well, let's just say if he wanted to, he could have very easily. It actually is better for people who are looking for forensic services or clinical assistance. It's always better to write me. I also, I'm on social media. I happen to really like Instagram. So, my book has an Instagram. I prefer that people contact me there as opposed to my personal one, but some people should do anyway. But I really like interacting with people who watch the show, because I always love the feedback. I always love, answering questions. I talk about these things all the time, and I especially love when people have their own personal stories that they want to share. A lot of times, people have told me stories that have worked their ways into lectures and things, because they become, with their permission, of course, because they become illustrative of some of the things we talk about. But yes, I can easily be found. My email is easily found on Google, and you can write me. So please don't be afraid of that. Contact me there.
Okay, so also one last thing, prayers for Miss Sophia
Oh yeah.
right now. And, Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday, Happy Hanukkah, happy everything for everybody. We're just so grateful that you support us. We are so appreciative. And with that, Karen and I are grateful for your prayers and your support. I mean, Gary knows, that the UNLV thing was way too close for comfort for us as a family. And so that said, we've got the last word for Dr. Brucato, and I'm going to pull out of here so that you can close us out.
Well, first of all, as always, I think we should pause and remember the victims in the Idaho case. I mean, I think every time I come on here, I always like to draw attention to the victims, as opposed to really paying more attention to who it is that is accused of attacking people or killing people. Let's remember their names. And it is in the spirit of that remembrance that we cringe at the idea of the house being torn down before there is justice for those people. And of course, I dedicate the show to my mentor and dear, dear, dear companion, Dr. Stone, as Shakespeare put it. If the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end. And that's very true. That is precisely how I feel about Michael. He was a colossal force in the world of forensics. He leaves a hole in the field. He leaves a hole in the heart of my particular world. I will carry on his work. I basically inherited his library and his documents for the purpose of carrying on that work. And as I've said, this holiday season, whatever it is that one believes, remember that the essence of the various holidays at this time of year is the conquering of the darkness by the light. Christmas is a particularly beautiful and deeply symbolic holiday. Hanukkah has that symbolism, and we can go through the various faiths and holidays that are celebrated this time of year, and you'll see that there's that same theme of light conquering the darkness. And I think in one of the conversations I had with Michael, we were reflecting on how people are always wondering how it is that we could spend so much time in the darkness, and tolerate it. And I think, Michael and I both concluded that what it is that the more darkness a person is exposed to, the brighter the light becomes. And you start to appreciate every person who, despite having free will in this world, chooses to use that free will to do good things for other people, kind things for other people. And remember something. Remember that when people do terrible things, they get noticed and they wind up on the front page of the newspaper. But you're not going to wind up on the front page of the newspaper if you do good most of the time. If you're the person that walks up behind somebody who's dropped some money and says, "Excuse me, you dropped this money," you're not going to be in the newspaper. But if you kill the person and run away with the money, you will be. And this gives through a kind of heuristic, a logical problem, it gives rise to the false impression that there aren't that many good people in the world. But the truth is, there is a band of goodness running through the world where you always see helpers. Every time I read about a terrible thing, like, for example, stuff that's going on in the Middle East, the terrible atrocities going on here, and crimes, etc. I always think, who are the people that come in and try to heal everybody? The doctors, the detectives, the cops, the firemen, the EMS workers, the nurses, the psychologists, the psychiatrists, the social workers, the mental health counselors, etc., and so on. And then you start to understand where the light is. Try to remember that all of us have free will, and at every moment of your life, you have the opportunity to do something that is loving and good, or something that is terrible and self-serving. And it's never too late to start with the goodness. And those little acts, I think, will be remembered forever, here and in heaven. Take care, everybody.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away.